Hello everyone! Today we will be going over how to make a basic car in Dreams. In my previous videos about cars, I went really in depth on how to make a physics-based car, including rolling, sounds, and more. This video is more over the logic for getting a really basic car for arcade-like racing. The difference between the two methods is that Dreams physics aren't entirely reliable, so having a car with fake collisions is a lot more stable. First off, go ahead and get your car model started. If you haven't seen my video on thermometer usage, I recommend watching it as it will help you understand why we need to make the model as I specify, or at least as close to it as possible. We need the main body and interior to be one model. At the most, have two models, not more. For the wheels, make one wheel sculpt and copy it for the other three positions. We are keeping these separate in case you would like to animate them. On the sculpts, set the collisions to be turned off, and the physics cost to low. We do this because we are making the collisions with a separate object. Next, we need to make a collision box to replace the actual model's collision. We don't need to actually sculpt it to fit the shape of the car, just vaguely. I started with a cube shape and fitted it to the dimensions of the car. This alone won't work because the edges aren't smooth enough, and any variation in the terrain can cause the car to act unexpectedly. To fix this, we need to cut a 45-degree edge onto each side of the bottom of the collision model. We can easily do this with the grid. Once you have that sculpted, we need to change the settings of it a bit. Change the friction to 10 to 20%. This changes depending on how and where you want your car to drive, but 10% is what I recommend. We also want to change the physics quality of the collision box to high. Using this method, we can get some bad results if we don't sculpt the roads properly. I highly recommend sculpting the road by hand as one object instead of many track pieces. If you do make it with pieces, make sure to have the models be as tight as possible, at least at first, so you can line them up properly and minimize the bumps in the road. In the future, if you're getting too many bumps, you may want to try re-stamping the 45-degree cuts on the edges, but with a slight blend to it using the stamp mode. Finally, add the collision object to the models group. Now we can start working on the logic. Go ahead and place a microchip in the models group, open its properties, scope out, and connect the apply to object input to the group. Obviously, we want to get the player input, so go ahead and grab a controller sensor. We also only want to drive if we are on the ground, and the way I like to detect the ground is with two trigger zones, so grab one from the sensors and input section as well. We also are going to need a speed sensor so we can only turn if we are moving. To make the car move, we can head over to the movers and output section to grab a mover as well as a rotator. So with car controls, the most basic controls we can have are steering, going forward, and going backwards. There's also braking, but that's usually combined with reversing. In order to get just left and right steering, we need a splitter, which takes a combined wire and splits them into separate outputs. In our case, we need to use it to get X, or otherwise left and right, from the local left stick. We need local, otherwise the outputs will flip while driving. To get moving backwards and going forward as one mover, we need a combiner. The very basic combiner takes two signals and makes one of them the negative signal. This way, if you are pressing the brake button, it reverses the speed that we are inputting to the mover. At this point, we have everything to get a very basic car going. Hook up the controls to their respective input. I'm using R2 and L2 for gas and reverse, which I plug into the combiner. Then the combiner into the speed input of the mover. Then I split the local lift stick for steering and plug the X output into the speed input of the rotator. Now we need to configure the mover and rotator for a bit. First, let's start with the mover. Go ahead and set the maximum speed of your car for the speed of the mover. 20 is pretty good to start with. Then 75% and 85% as the strength and dampening respectively is also pretty good. We need to make it local space, and of course set the gizmo so the arrow is facing forward, and the Y bit is facing upwards. Next, to give it better handling, we need to change the dampening properties. We want really low dampening on the X and Y, so something like 10% or lower is good. And since Z is left and right, we don't want to drift all the time, so we want to change that to be really high, around 85%. The mover direction isn't really needed here, so we can set that to 0%. Next, we need to do the steering. First off, whatever speed you pick needs to be negative, or else the controls will be reversed. Or you could flip the Y gizmo upside down, but either way works. I found a speed around 200 is nice. I picked 240. Then 75% is good for both strength and dampening. On the dampening page, we put 100% into X and 20% into Y and Z. 100% into the direction. I found it to be too delayed or drifty with less than 100% in the direction. Now we want to make sure that we cannot move if we aren't touching the ground. The way I achieve this is by making two trigger zones, one for the front wheels and one for the back. And on the labels page, turn off one label, and set the car's label as this label. I'm using machine. This makes it so the car can't detect itself, but it will be able to detect if it's on the ground. Since we have two of these, we need an AND gate. Hook up the trigger zones to the AND gate, then we could directly hook this up to the combiner, mover, and rotator's power input, so we can only move if we're on the ground. This works well, but at times you may leave the ground for just half a second or so and lose control. We don't want that. So let's add half a second grace time to this requirement. To do this, we need two signal manipulators. One is to fade down the signal. This is the grace time, and I set mine to only 0.2 seconds. The next one we set to threshold on the custom remapper mode and set the max input to 0.01. This creates an output of 1 whenever the signal is active, so we fully power on the gadgets. We can use the output of the signal manipulator to turn on the mover and combiner. However, we want to set up an additional set for the rotator. We need to use another threshold signal manipulator with the speed sensor speed output, so we can't rotate if we are still. I set the threshold for this one as 0.1, as anything lowered can be triggered by a bug with movers that causes objects to jitter. Now, with an AND gate and both the signal manipulators, we can power the rotator. Now we have a very basic vehicle. If this is all you need, then great. However, we can take it several steps further. First off, the reverse speed is way too fast. Also, there is no acceleration. The speed is always the level you hold the trigger at. We can easily change signals with a signal manipulator, so we can grab one of those and connect the reverse input into that first, then hook up the signal manipulator to the reverse output. Then hook up the signal manipulator to the reverse input, as well as deleting the old cables. To limit the output, we can use the custom remapper mode and change the max output to a smaller number, something like 0.20, which is 20% of the original output. We can use another signal manipulator to add acceleration time to the speed by changing the output smoothing. We can also use this to add some delay to braking. I used about 10-second rise time and 2.5-second fall time. Then of course we connect the combiner to the signal manipulator and the manipulator to the mover speed input. One last thing, we need to make turning less powerful when we are slower. In order to do this, we use the speed output, a signal manipulator, and a calculator. With the signal manipulator, on the custom remapper mode, we need to put in our top speed. We can't really do this directly because due to how Dreams works, we will never reach the top speed of the mover speed. First, hook up the speed output into the signal manipulator. Then we need to figure out our top speed. To determine our top speed, we can open the signal manipulator, go to custom remapper, then use test mode to get to our top speed. Then use the learn input button on the left side of the remapper button. Now, on the right side, set the minimum output to 0.4. This will make it so we have a decent turning speed to start with. Now, using the calculator, plug the X output of the splitter into the A input, and the signal manipulator output to the B input. Then set the mode to multiply. This will give us a signal strength determined by our input and the car's speed. Hook up the output of the calculator into the speed input of the rotator, and now we are done. A very basic arcade car. However, This can be extended even further to include animations, sounds, gear shifting, and more. If you'd like to see specific videos on those topics to extend this, let me know, but for now I think this video is long enough. I will give you some tips to start you off though if you think you can do it on your own. To animate the wheels, add an invisible cube to the front wheels as a group piece. This way you can animate the wheels spinning in the group, then animate the group to let them turn left and right. For sounds, check out Media Molecule's engine example. For gear shifting, try using a selector, as well as multiple signal manipulators with different minimum and maximum signal outputs, as well as different fade in and out times. Once again, I'd like to take this time to thank my patrons: Christian Sanchez, Darius Colasin, Empty Chest, Mythic Marty, Patrick Keller, William Snyder, and Skylar Ruin. Once again, thank you all for watching, and have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye!